Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, NeoSystems GovCardConnect, Best Practices to Accepting Credit Card Payments. I'm Brian Giblin, a Product Manager here at NeoSystems. With me today, I also have Jim Shanahan, President of FTS of CardConnect. Jim identified the credit card market and government spending on credit cards, that market about 4 years ago, and has been tracking it ever since, watching it grow, looking at its trends. Brings a wealth of information and knowledge and expertise in government contracting and the government's use of credit cards, purchase cards. Also with me today, I have Dave Kilgallen. He's the Director of Integrated Solutions at CardConnect. He's been involved with the integration of CardConnect with SAP and Oracle, and now he's teamed up with NeoSystems to help us with our integration of cost points. Our agenda today, we're going to go through some introductions, and then we're going to take a look at that marketplace where the government's spending with credit cards. Then we're going to go into security and PCI compliance, all the issues there. I know with what we've heard about Target of late, I know it's a concern for everyone on this call. Then we'll look at the additional business challenges that come with accepting credit cards as a form of payment. Then we'll get into our solution of GovCardConnect and some of the benefits you can achieve by using GovCardConnect. But first, I'd like to start us with a poll so we can get to know you just a little bit better. So how many of you are processing credit cards today? Is it not processing at all, 1 to 10 transactions a month? Maybe you're doing a lot more, 10 to 100 transactions or over 100 transactions per month. Interesting results, 90% of you are not processing transactions today, and that we'll go into a little bit about what you need to start processing transactions. I'd like to get into some of the issues that you have, what's holding you back from accepting them, and some of you are doing some lightweight transactions, 1 to 10 transactions a month. Very interesting. Just briefly a little bit about NeoSystems. At NeoSystems, we like to say, grow ahead, we've got your back office. At NeoSystems, we provide strategic back office services. These include accounting, HR, and IT. And forming an umbrella over these services, we have our consulting services. This includes implementations and upgrades and business process reviews. For upgrades, we've done or are in the process of doing over 50 upgrades from cost point 6 to cost point 7. So for some of you who are still looking to upgrade, please, if you need some help, let us know. We have over 125 employees, and within our secure private cloud, we have over 450 companies representing over 27,500 employees. I would like to share with you a little brief introduction of CardConnect. CardConnect has over 50,000 companies that they're supporting with credit card processing, and they're processing over $15 billion per year in payments. You can see a few of the names up there. One I will highlight, Social Security Administration has become a client of CardConnect. So let's get into the marketplace. What's going on out there? Well, the government spending $18 billion per year with their GSA Smart Pay purchase cards. That's government people, government employees making purchases with their Smart Pay cards. And it's not just small transactions. We're looking at over $4 billion in purchases over $10,000. $8 billion from Veteran Affairs, $6 billion from Department of Defense, $750 million at Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, $500 million, Department of Homeland Security, $500 million. And as to paraphrase the expression, $500 million here, $500 million there, pretty soon we're talking real money. And the purchase cards are out to close to 300,000 government employees are empowered with purchase cards. They can go out and make those purchases, those micro purchases under $3,000 anytime. When they have a need, they can go make the purchase. Those micro purchases I mentioned, the under $3,000, the charge card, the purchase card, becomes the contractual mechanism. So those 300,000 government employees can make the purchase decision on their own. And there were over 20 million purchases made on purchase cards in fiscal year 2012. For larger purchases, and I mentioned already, the over $10,000, $4 billion worth of purchases that were made, you need a contract in place, but with that contract in place, if the contract says that you can accept credit cards, and that's done by mutual agreement, contracts can be amended, then the charge card becomes the commitment mechanism and the payment mechanism. no more purchase order is required. The purchase card becomes the purchase order in effect. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jim Shanahan, who's going to take us into a little deeper dive into where's GSA going with the Smart Pay cards, and what are our future trends, and what can we expect?
Thanks, Brian. Well, let's take a look at some emerging trends in government procurement. The ongoing economic and budget situation in the government has brought a much higher degree of accountability and efficiency to government agencies and contractors. And this really happened in three different ways. Number one, to reduce waste. Number two, to prevent instances of fraudulent transactions. And number three, and the one we're going to go further in today, is to make smarter procurements for goods and services. There have been and will continue to be directives to increase contract performance, transparency reporting, and accountability for purchases. This is really taken from the GSA website. And then there's this term called Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiatives. It is the big driver and will continue to be one of the most effective initiatives to fully leverage the government's buying power and save taxpayer dollars. Let's go a little further into Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiatives. I'd first like to give you a description that's on the GSA site. The GSA describes this as a structured and collaborative process of critically analyzing an organization's spending patterns to better leverage its purchasing power, reduce costs, and improve overall performance. So this has become, as I said earlier, that one of the big drivers that's going on in the government right now in terms of procurement. A point I want to make here is all federal strategic sourcing initiatives in the area of smart pay transactions require what we call level 3 transaction detail. And Brian Giblin will go into more detail of what level 3 transaction detail is a little later in the presentation. So the FSSI process within the federal government right now, there's currently 9 schedules that are on FSSI and 3 what they call commodity POST programs. In 2014, the GSA has announced that they're going to launch 10 new strategic sourcing initiatives. This is posted by Dan Tanglerini, the administrator of the GSA, back in early 2013. And the future is interesting. This actually came out in late October. The government inked, the GSA inked a program, strategic sourcing support, called Strategic Supporting Support Contracts. And they worked with a company called Sapient Government Solutions and a team of 5 other consulting groups to get more leverage out of the FSSI program. And as part of that release, this is a quote from that press release. It says the federal government will require that the FSSI will be the vehicle by which all federal agencies will purchase goods and services. So it's pretty clear that this is the direction that the government's going in. Okay, let's look at some additional things that have been put out by the GSA. And there's the reasons and the benefits of why smart pay FSSIs make sense. Again, level 3 line item detail, which will be described later. The benefits for the government, we mentioned this before, but accountability and transparency. Certainly cost avoidance, they're going to buy smarter. There's a leveraging of card for strategic sourcing. It will be an important piece in terms of doing business with the government. And the last thing for the government is there's quite a few refunds that the government gets back by the use of the Smart Pay card. In fact, it's projected to do over $1 billion in the next few years in terms of rebates. So a very significant amount of money. For the contractors, also some really good benefits. Faster funding. In most cases, a contractor will get funded within 24 hours. Savings. By doing a level 3 transaction and clearing interchange properly, the average savings are between 25 and 50% of what they're currently paying. Tremendous amount of savings. We've even seen it much higher than that, but that's the average that the GSA puts out. It'll increase sales potential for the contractor. It'll create success stories. It'll also put them in what we call PCI DSS compliance, which Dave Kilgallen will be describing as soon as I get finished here. And then the last thing, it'll make them a level 3 compliant contractor. So there's some real clear reasons why doing SmartPay level 3 transactions will be a benefit to both the government and the contractor. SmartPay is also expanding, and this really comes from the GSA again. The SmartPay card currently does around $18 billion, as Brian was talking about, or 3.5% of the government spend. But that will grow to around $60 billion, or 11% of government spending in the next 5 years. So there's going to be quite a growth in terms of the SmartPay card. The other area that's going to expand is they're doing agency AP expenditure reviews, the GSA, to really educate and train agencies on the value of the SmartPay program. There's going to be a number of grant funding programs paid through by the SmartPay card. Reoccurring expenses are a natural for the SmartPay program. BPAs, blanket purchase agreements, are also another natural for the SmartPay card. And then the last thing, just to emphasize, and this is something the GSA put out earlier this year, or excuse me, earlier in 2013, they're going to add a minimum of 5 schedules per year to the FSSI program. And why? Well, this is again published on the GSA site. The administrative cost of doing a SmartPay transaction are 80% less than doing another type of transaction. So it's a lot more efficient for the government. And as I mentioned earlier, refunds will be up to $1 billion. And then state and local governments. State and local governments spend in the area of $2 trillion. So it's actually 4 times larger than the federal government. And we're using Virginia as kind of an example here. It's one of the leaders in terms of doing business in alignment with the federal government. The state of Virginia's got their own site, the online electronic procurement portal called EVA. They've integrated everything with the GSA, which is absolutely the way they should do it. And it's open to local and public entities, the number 245. So universities, schools, local governments. I mean, there's quite a collaboration going on there in terms of enjoying the benefits of what the GSA is done in this area. It also makes up almost 79,000 vendors and credit cards. There's over 35,000 different agencies that accept credit cards and charge cards through the state of Virginia. I'd now like to introduce Dave Kilgallen, who's the Director of Integrated Solutions at GovCardConnect, and Dave's going to talk about security and PCI. Dave?
Thanks, Jim. Hello, everyone. Up till now, Jim and Brian have done a great job talking about the initiatives, the trends in government spending, and with a lot of focus areas, with a lot of industry, card processing being one of them. Of course, there is oversight. And if from the earlier poll, it seems as though most of you are not currently processing, so I hope this is of particular value to you as an introduction to PCI. So PCI, if you're not familiar with it now, once you move into the credit card processing arena, you certainly will become familiar with it, and hopefully you'll achieve compliance. For those of you that are not familiar with it, think of PCI as Sarbanes-Oxley. What Sarbanes-Oxley is to financial reporting, that's what PCI is to credit card processing. So again, it's a compliance program, an overarching program to ensure that card processing is done in a secure, effective, and safe manner. No coincidence that long ago PCI was conceived by the 4 major card brands, American Express, MasterCard, Visa, and Discover in 2004. In 2006, the Japanese Credit Bureau joined the union as well. PCI, by the way, stands for the purchase card industry. So the guidelines that these card brands set forth basically control the compliance or ensure the compliance of any partner, any service provider, any merchant that wants to accept or process credit cards. PCI is, I'll try to word this as delicately as possible, is the card brand's way of pushing the responsibility and the liability to reduce fraud out to merchants and service providers in a very no-nonsense way. The card brands are saying, we set these standards, do these, or you'll meet with the consequences. And as we've seen in the news recently, the consequences can be significant. In my experience, essentially the PCI program is about 275 rules and regulations that can make your life absolutely miserable if you're not compliant. Again, PCI, as a security standards entity, was conceived in 2004 and went into full effect for merchants and service providers in June of 2005, sponsored by those 5 card brands that are listed. Over those last 10 years, we've moved through 3 versions already, and version 3.0 was just published in November of last year. And for many merchants, for many service providers, for many hardware manufacturers, the requirements are still kind of sinking in. PCI functions in a rather unique way. It takes feedback from merchant members, service provider members, etc., and then on a 2-year cycle revises, publishes for internal review in a draft format, and then publishes as a final version on a 2-year cycle. So each year, every month, each quarter, the sands are shifting, and you can refer to that as the shifting sands of compliance, and depending upon your level of compliance, it could be the sinking sands of compliance. I guess the short story is that it's a constantly evolving model. The rules, the regulations, the guidelines, and the suggestions change regularly with as new attack vectors are identified. Everything from hardware, network, connectivity, processing, processes, personnel, physical security, etc. They're all covered by the standard. And staying current with the requirements for the standard is really a challenge. I know from personal experience, I spend about 30% of my day or week reading, reviewing, ensuring that I have a good and firm understanding of PCI so that we can communicate it to our partners like NeoSystems and the other merchants that we deal with. The PCI standards apply to any entity that stores, processes, or transmits card data, and as soon as you memorize the letters PCI, you will also memorize those 3 verbs. It's part and parcel for the mission of the PCI organization. And you can think of PCI as an overarching standard, and in the 4 or 5 slides that I have here today, in no means is it meant to be an in-depth coverage of all the rules and regulations. There are many, many chapters, categories, and subcategories that are relevant to different parts or partners that participate in the card processing process, but the 3 that are probably most recognizable and the 3 that I'll cover today in limited fashion are the ones that I have listed here. The PTS, the first item, is the PIN transaction security requirements, and they're aimed particularly at those companies like ID Tech, Ingenico, Zebra, and some of the other ones that manufacture swipe devices. The third bullet item is aimed at application developers, and GovCardConnect as a partner falls into this category. We have a PA-DSS certified application. Our gateway is PA-DSS certified, and it's the exact same gateway that NeoSystems has integrated into. But the second item is for merchants, and I will make the assumption that most of the people on the phone are merchant related or in the customer facing world. It's the PCI DSS, the data security standard, that's most relevant to you as a merchant, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. So PCI standards is overarching. We have people that make hardware devices, we have merchants that do the processing, we have application developers or vendors that create software. Regardless of your role, regardless of your position in the industry, any lack of compliance, as deemed by the card brands, could result in significant financial penalties. All right, so with a focus on the area that's particularly relevant for merchants, the PCI DSS. The PCI DSS, as I mentioned before, is approximately 275 rules, guidelines, regulations, etc., that fall under 6 main control objectives, and they're listed in bold on the left, each one with a requirement to the right, and that breaks down further into 12 requirements. Each of those requirements then has a number of associated questions, targeted areas of focus, etc., that draw your attention as participating in this process, right, to these critical areas, whether it's a handoff, how you're storing data, how you're transmitting data, etc., all the way down from, at the very first one, just as a for instance, how your network is structured and how your firewall is configured. If you're using vendor-supplied packages, that you've changed everything, the default passwords, etc., all the way down to what I consider the more physical or personnel-related, which is tracking and monitoring access, directive number 10, that you're regularly testing, and that you have a policy that you train your employees and you can produce evidence of that training, which is outlined by requirement number 12. This is a simple view, and I can't stress enough that in a couple slides it's a lot more involved. It's really is a challenge, and we'll talk on the next slide. We'll talk about those challenges. So picture 275 rules that you have to comply with. And those rules and your level of compliance varies by your level of processing. So if you're a large merchant and you accept 6 million card transactions per year or more, you're probably a level 1. Unless you do less than a certain dollar amount, then you could be a level 1 for Visa, MasterCard, but maybe not a level 1 for Amex. So not only do your requirements vary by level, your levels vary by the card brand. So it's now we're thinking two-dimensionally here, or maybe even three-dimensionally, where now I got to figure out where I fit into this cube, where I fit into this atmosphere of compliance, and making sure that I'm satisfying everything for card brand A and making sure that I've done everything I need for card brand B. If you're a heavy hitter, if you're a large service provider, an application vendor, or a level 1, you will routinely go through quarterly scans, and those scans mean quite what it states physically is your network will be scanned. Any vulnerabilities will be exposed. You will have to undergo an annual audit and submit a report on compliance. All that are posted on the PCI Security Standards website. Other vendors, merchants, etc., that participate at a lower level, they have to comply with what's called a self-assessment questionnaire, and those SACs come in 4 flavors: a SAC A through a SAC D. And without going into all the details, the SAC D is the heaviest. So if you are hosting credit card data in an encrypted fashion, if you have a customer data or a card processing data environment that needs to be firewalled, you are interacting with the processor, the major processor, first data, TSYS, Vantiv, etc., then you're going to be shaded more towards a SAC D, which is 32 pages, all 275 questions. If, however, you have decided to outsource the storage of your data, or maybe use a virtual terminal, or partner with a company like NeoSystems, which is integrated to a gateway and employs a method of tokenization so that you really have limited the exposure on the front side, on your ERP side or your order management side, then we can push you down to a SAC A or a SAC B. The SAC A is only 2 pages long, and I believe it's 12 questions, and probably can be completed in about an hour. A SAC B is a little bit more, maybe a half a dozen pages, but significantly reduces your compliance effort. And in this case, less is more is I guess a key phrase. Less is better. So the less that you're storing on site, the less that you're actually touching card data, the less risk that you bring on yourself, you greatly reduce the risk associated with a breach. You greatly reduce the effort, the cost, and the level of compliance that's necessary in-house, and that's what we're trying to bring to you today. So let's talk about cost, and these numbers are averages, and they're aimed primarily at level 1, which would be the largest type of merchant. Some of them are tangible, some of them are less tangible. To remain compliant, you probably have one or more business GRC or IT persons dedicated, full or part-time, to PCI compliance. Maybe they attend the annual conference, which if you're moving into PCI, by the way, I wholeheartedly endorse you attending the PCI conference. It's a great way to get some training, meet some partners, and make connections with other people that are maybe growing at the same rate that you are, or in the same place in that model of maturity. These people are remaining trained on the latest. Maybe they're becoming certified. On average, and this was, I think I lifted this from one of the Gartner reports, if you're storing card data, most large organizations in their data center are spending approximately $6 per credit card number per year to store in an encrypted fashion to store that credit card information. Now you can multiply that pretty quickly if to find out what your projected cost may be if you're doing everything in-house. I had mentioned before about the scans and audits related to PCI compliance. Those are usually facilitated through accredited scanning vendors, or ASVs. An audit will be performed by a QSA firm, qualified security assessor. You may have internal security assessors, of which I am one, or a PCI certified professional, a PCIP. There's cost associated with the effort. There's cost associated with the audit. A very large audit. It's not outside our experience to have an audit that involves 2 or more individuals from a QSA firm to come in and take a look at your processes, your documentation, and your testing evidence, and spend days, if not weeks, to do the audit. And they can run into the tens of thousands of dollars, if not more. The average cost of compliance for a level 1 merchant is in excess of $500,000 per year, and that's to establish compliance and then maintain that compliance year over year. So it's a significant nut to take a bite out of, right? And this is all in processing in the ideal world. So this is not including a breach. This is not including fines and penalties applied by the card brands because of a large or small breach. I know everyone's kind of focused on the news and the Target and the Neiman Marcus breach that's been obviously discussed widely. There'll be a determination and somebody will pay as a result of it. So the cost can be significant. Okay, so you've heard about the ideal, and you've heard about the compliance aspects of PCI and the effort associated with it, and with 90% of you indicating that you're not currently processing, maybe the state of your PCI program is best defined on paper somewhere on a project plan. But for those of you that are currently, or that you are considering, and you're starting to design or select partners to help you in the design, it behooves you to define what the current state of your compliance is. Are you compliant? Do you lack compliance? Have you partnered with a QSA or an ASV to ensure that what you're laying out is, is sound and reproducible and defendable? I found that in many cases, opinions vary from QSA to QSA. The PCI standards are less how to do things and when to do things and what tools to use, and more about describing the ideal world. So what one QSA considers sound and defensible, another QSA may not. So it's important to partner with with the right people that have been in this industry for a while. Additionally, what resources are you or do you intend to dedicate to your program? I mentioned before the PCI securitystandards.org website, maybe a QSA, an ASV. Is anyone on your staff intending to attend the conference and maybe go for training? And what members from your IT staff will be a part of that? Certainly the networking, your PMO potentially, to make sure that compliance is built into your base processes. And how are you staying current with the latest requirements? I mentioned before that I dedicate about 30% of my time. That may be that varies from week to week, and some weeks it feels like an underestimate, but that's going to be a challenge. How many people and how many hours per hour, or per week, or per month you dedicate? And have you had a chance to calculate the real cost? So just some parting ideas to think about as you make your journey. All right, I'm going to hand off to Brian, who's we talked about compliance as a challenge and PCI. Brian's going to talk about some of the other challenges that you'll be faced with as you make the journey into card processing.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, as if the security challenges aren't enough, there have to be additional business challenges to accepting credit cards. And for those of you, I'm glad there's so many of you who have not started accepting yet, because then I'll go into a little bit more depth into how to get your account set up and get it set up correctly. Then, as Jim mentioned about that the government's looking for level 3 data, how do you go about providing that data, and what are those data that you need to provide? Then talk about some of the current solutions that require such a manual effort, and then let's not kid ourselves. The big issue, the big challenge to accepting charge cards and credit cards is those transaction fees hit the bottom line. So let's talk about getting your account set up. One of the things that's required to set up your account is they want a merchant category code. And this is a 4-digit number, and there's over 600 of these. And you'll see everything from toy stores and coffee shops, and it can be rather challenging to figure out which one applies to you. That's why you want to partner with somebody who's very experienced with this, who understands setting up government contractors. Find those category codes, something like computer programming. That might be applicable to you. You want it to match what you're selling, because every once in a while some merchants, the payment will be denied when it goes through because what's being charged doesn't match the category for the merchant. Now, a lot of you do services and products, and so how do you choose between computer software and computer programming? Very simply, it's just pick whichever one's your higher percentage of your business. It's okay if computer software goes under computer program. They're not that tightly monitored, but it does matter if it's completely wrong. And the other thing I'll caution you about is not to go too general. And specifically, I'll tell you straight out, not to use general merchandise. It sounds like might be an easy catch-all to just check that box and be done. But I heard one story of a government contractor who used general merchandise, and then when they went to sell to the post office, it was blocked, because the post office will not allow the merchant category code for general merchandise to be used. It will just stop the payment. So it's good to go with a partner who understands these things, someone who's familiar with government contracting. Jim mentioned the level 3 credit card data. When you process a credit card for payment, some of this information, like credit card number, you get that off the credit card, the amount, very clear, very straightforward. That's your level 1 data. Your level 2 data, many of you are familiar with this when you order something online through any online retailer, Amazon or whatever. You enter your street address, your zip code, that card verification number, those 3 or 4 digits, you enter that as well. This becomes part of the level 2 data that gets entered as part of your processing. Then we get to the fun one, the level 3, and this is what the government is looking for. They want the part number, a description, the quantity, the unit of measure, the unit cost, the net amount, the tax amount, all these on a per line item basis. So if you have 10 line items, you need to enter these and other data 10 times. They also want the ship to zip, the ship from zip, and the ship to country. Moving on to the next challenge is the manual effort. If you look at some of the solutions today, is you've entered all these data in CostPoint. All those data are in CostPoint. You probably would have to go hunting around to find them, but they're in there. So when you go, if you use a disparate system to process your credit card payment, you now have to rekey that. All that invoice data, line item by line item, has to be entered. Very time consuming, and I know some of you are extremely attention detailed. You are near perfect. But regardless, sooner or later, somebody's going to make a mistake. And then it's the more time spent through. It's like, wait a minute, it's supposed to add up to this amount, but it doesn't. Now what do? I'll look back. And it becomes so time consuming, and time is a valuable asset to you and to your company. And then after the payment gets processed, all the credit card transactions come back and you get a deposit into your bank. If you're only doing 1 or 2 transactions a month, you might just have one bank deposit with one credit card transaction. Fairly easy to line those two up. Whereas Dave was talking about before, where less is more or less is better, for reconciling, this is where I'd say more is worse. Because the more transactions you have, you might have 3 transactions one day, 5 transactions one day, and then trying to add up which transactions came in which day with which deposit can be extremely time-consuming and error-prone as well. And then to hit on the transaction fees, let's just take an example of a $100 purchase. Somebody buys, the government buys $100 worth of goods or services. You'll get back $96.50 into your account if on a typical basis you're getting charged about 3.5%. And $3.50 doesn't sound like very much, but if you're doing $1 million in transactions a year, that's $35,000. That is a significant amount hitting your bottom line. And government contractors, as we all know, don't have the highest profit margins. So we came up with GovCardConnect. And we started with our focus on cost point. There'll be no PCI data in cost point. Dave was talking about all that PCI data. No PCI data, no credit card numbers are stored in cost point. The other thing we said was cost point could be hosted anywhere. So if your cost point is on-premise, that's fine. If your cost point is hosted with NeoSystems, that's fine too. And if your cost point is hosted somewhere else, that'll work too, but maybe you want to consider bringing it over to NeoSystems. GovCardConnect will pull out the customer information, the invoice information, using web services out of your cost point. There's no rekeying of that data. You'll enter the credit card number into GovCardConnect, and that information is sent to CardConnect. CardConnect is where the credit card numbers are stored. They're not stored in GovCardConnect. They're not stored in CostPoint. CardConnect sends back a token, which we store in GovCardConnect. So you have a token that allows you, and only you, to make transactions between you and that customer, that government agency, or that commercial company, because credit cards and purchase cards, we support both. So that goes out to CardConnect. CardConnect goes to First Data, validates that it's a valid credit card number, passes that information, and a confirmation is sent back to you, the user. 1 to 2 business days later, those dollars are deposited into your bank account. That deposit information comes back through CardConnect and GovCardConnect, and then it comes into CostPoint through managing cash receipts. So we have a very quick, easy click, 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 and you can reconcile those transactions. And I'll demonstrate that for you in just a moment. And what I want to highlight is because we get the information from CostPoint, all those line item details that are available in CostPoint, that level 3 data is pulled from CostPoint and provided, and that transaction is now processed as a level 3 transaction. So the government gets what they need, but you also get something out of that. You get a lower transaction fee. And I'm going to explain that in a little more detail. But on average, even for small purchases, instead of 3.5% or 4%, you might be paying 2.5%, and I'll explain how that happens. But first I want to explain to you where those fees come from and how they're defined. The total transaction fee you pay is a combination of 2 pieces. It's the acquisition fee, what your acquiring bank charges you, plus an interchange rate. Interchange rates are set by Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. So those interchange rates are in some ways out of your control, but some ways within your control. Because the interchange rates are defined by 3 things. The merchant category code. Remember I mentioned that before? It's important to get that set up right. How it's processed. So if it's a level 3 transaction, you're going to get a lower rate. And the card type. And I'll give you an example of that, but the government purchase card is your card type there. Very important. Now, if you're missing some of the pieces here, if you're not supplying all the level 3 data, you might get downgraded. And this is where you'll get charged more than the best qualified rate. And candidly, some merchant banks tend to put higher downgrade fees in there. That's where they make their money. They're looking for you to make those mistakes. What I recommend is you work with a partner there who has an interchange optimization program, who looks to make sure, who reviews your statements proactively to make sure that you're getting the lowest rate. So instead of you wondering why you got a higher rate and calling up, they're going through and saying, hey, we see you're missing these pieces of data, that you're getting these downgrades. Let's work together to see how we can supply the information you need to get the lowest qualified rate. So let's talk a little bit more about those interchange rates. The GSA purchase card has a special rate. This is how you can get a low rate on those small purchases. For a GSA purchase card, the interchange rate, let me round off and call it 2% plus 10 cents. Even with a larger acquisition fee of even 50 basis points, you're still coming in at about 2.5%. I like to be conservative, so I'll say let's call it 2.5% on those GSA purchase cards, even for the small, low dollar amounts. But what gets exciting is for those high dollar amounts. One of the things that came out just this past October, well, October of 2013, is that the Visa Large Purchase Advantage rate would now be expanded or extended to the GSA SmartPay cards. So for very large purchases, purchases $15,000, $20,000, or even more, you can start seeing rates of 1.5% or even 1% are achievable for the extremely high purchases, level 3 transactions on those Visa SmartPay cards. Really exciting, because when you think about you're going to get paid in 1 to 2 business days instead of 30 days, and your cost of that is 1%, potentially, that is dramatically less. And when you look at the cost of money, the time value of money, what you might pay in interest for your borrowing fees, these transaction fees become very competitive to get you when you consider that you're getting paid faster. So right now, I'm going to switch over to a demo. So this is GovCardConnect, and I'm going to log in as if I was a user just like you. So we log into GovCardConnect, and here it displays some deposits that I've recently done and some other things. I might want to do search if I came in and wanted to look for a particular transaction. Maybe I was looking for something from the Navy and wanted to see where was a transaction I was looking for. I come in, here is one with the invoice date, what are the details, okay. So here we have the reference, the invoice number, the invoice date, and so we have all that information available to us. I mentioned the reconciling of credit card transactions as well. And here I'm going to look at, we have 3 invoices on a particular transaction. Now this should look familiar to many of you if you're familiar with managed cash receipts in CostPoint. And so in here, all we need to do is, since this was received in May, I might put this into period 5. I have my deposit. Here are the invoice numbers, 392, 393, 394, all the amounts. I have the account fees, where things are going to hit, the organization level, and all I do is click Reconcile. 8 is the number assigned to this cash receipt. Write that down, people, 8, because now we're going to go take a look in CostPoint. So let's log into CostPoint. This is CostPoint 7 for those of you who are familiar with it. For those of you who are not, here's a quick glimpse of CostPoint 7. So we come into CostPoint, accounts receivable, cash receipts processing, manage cash receipts. So I'm going to do this the easy way. I'm just going to say find them all for me. And I am going to sort by date. And here's today, entry date 1/23/2004. Here's our receipt number 8. And we come down here and look. And here's our transaction, the customer, the account number, all this was done in web services. You saw how long it took, just a matter of seconds. Instead of you trying to look up each and every transaction, GovCardConnect remembers which invoice goes with which reference number for which transaction, brings that deposit together, and loads it in. So now you're ready to post this transaction in CostPoint. So that's just a quick demo there in GovCardConnect of how you can reconcile a cash receipt. I want to summarize some of the solution benefits there. Dave took us through how using CardConnect and GovCardConnect can reduce your PCI compliance costs and risks. I think I get really excited about when having to do a 2-page form versus, how long was that one, 32 pages, Dave? I think 2 pages, less is always better when it comes to forms.
True, true.
And you can save time through the integration, the invoice data. There's no rekeying of that invoice data. I watched somebody, they were doing transactions in a disparate system. They were moving very fast. It was still taking them 30 seconds per line item to enter the data. They were copy, paste, and it was still. And I looked at it, I was like, you got to make a mistake soon. I can see it coming. And then cash receipts, again, trying to line up what's in CostPoint with what's in another system. It's time-consuming, it's error-prone. And the lower fees, looking at driving a 3.5% transaction fee down to 2.5% on your small dollar amounts, and for the larger purchases, being able to drive that down to potentially 1 to 1.5%. Really compelling, really strong benefit of GovCardConnect. And it supports the level 3 data, and it's that level 3 data that the government wants. It's going to insist on it. Either you supply it during the transaction, or you supply it monthly in filling out additional forms and sending it to them. One way or another, they want that data, and they want it so that they can drive down their costs. And you know, if you're having to be delivering the best cost, this will allow them to show that you are the preferred vendor, and they'll start steering more and more purchases towards you. So some of your key takeaways: the government is spending $18 billion per year, and they're, as Jim told us, they're looking to drive that to $60 billion per year. And more, they're looking for the level 3 data to be part of that transaction. Another key takeaway is whoever you choose, you know, many of you are not processing credit cards today. Whoever you choose, make sure they're familiar with the GSA SmartPay program. They have an interchange optimization program, that they're familiar with doing business with government contractors. The people who are just doing coffee shops, they're very good at that. But if they're not familiar with government contracting, there's little nuances there that could really get you astray. And you do need to provide the level 3 line item details, and by doing so, you're going to reduce your credit card costs. Before we open it up to questions, and if you're starting to think of your questions, please enter them into the questions box, and we'll get to them momentarily. But in the meantime, I want to do one more poll. What accounting system are you currently using today? Are you on CostPoint 6? Are you on CostPoint 7? Maybe you're using Oracle or SAP, Deltek First, GCS. Okay. Good percentage. It looks like a tie between those on CostPoint 6 and those of you on Deltek First, GCS Premier. And some of you are on CostPoint 7, so all good to know. For those of you on CostPoint 6, GovCardConnect is available for CostPoint 7, so probably want to talk about what your upgrade plans are and your upgrade path. And for those of you on Deltek First, GCS Premier, right now it is just available for CostPoint, but making a GCS version is on my roadmap for the year. Okay, so let's start opening up to questions, and as the questions start to come in, I'll highlight a few other resources that are available to you. I blog occasionally on credit cards and credit card use by the government, and so I encourage you to go to the CostPoint 7 Center blog. For those of you still on CostPoint 6, we do have some upcoming webinars that might be of interest to you. The CIO's Guide to Upgrading to CostPoint 7, the CFO's Guide to Upgrading to CostPoint 7. Those will both be available in late February and early March. And if you also have questions about GovCardConnect, I recommend you go to GovCardConnect.com. So all great resources available to you. So Ann, how are we doing for questions there? So please start typing in. We always get this one question. And will the slides be available? Will the recording be available? Yes, we should have the recording available to you in a few days. And another question here. Is this only available for Cost Point 7? Yes, currently it is available to Cost Point 7 users. And as I said, we are looking at a GCS version coming out this year. Dave, Jim, any closing thoughts you have for us today?
I appreciate the time we're able to spend today on this webinar.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today, and look forward to following up with some of you. And please, if you have any more questions, you can check out GovCardConnect.com, or please feel free to contact any of us. Our contact information is at the bottom of the slide. Thank you.